Yeah, Joseph Campbell is total bunk. Let me. First of all, I mean, yeah, no, I mean, first of all, I mean, Joseph Campbell's whole theory of the hero's journey. Let's talk about that first, and then let's talk about why his deeper method beyond his specific ideas is also not helpful. So his specific idea is derived of this mashup of this idea from George Frazer, who is this totally discredited 19th century anthropologist, this British anthropologist who basically had this idea that all cultures were telling the same story as the British Empire. So he basically sent out these letters from his Scottish home, across to the various quadrants of the British Empire, trying to confirm his previous hypothesis that basically all stories were the same stories you could find in the Bible and Shakespeare. And this is complete nonsense. Other cultures tell different stories. There's a huge variety of global literature. It's not the same story recycled over and over and over again. But nevertheless, Frazer came up with this idea that all cultures are telling the same story of a hero who sacrifices himself to rebirth everyone else. So that's part one of the Joseph Campbell pseudoscience. Part two is Freud, who is not only a completely debunked psychologist, but is one of the most detrimental pseudo-academics in history. I mean, the number of lives who have been damaged by Freud, the number of young people who have gone into a clinician's office in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and had their minds torn apart by his totally and utterly bunk theories. So then we have this idea from Freud that our dreams can be interpreted. So that's part two of the Joseph Campbell pseudoscience. And then part three is Carl Jung, who's a very nice person, unlike Freud, who's not a kind of like malevolent presence. But had this totally bogus idea of the collective unconscious, that somehow all humans were participating in this universal archetypal mind, populated with these archetypal characters and story elements. So anyway, you mash those together and you get the hero's journey, which is this idea that every story is basically about a hero who journeys into our collective unconscious to recover the truth and then bring it back for us all to see. I mean, that's basically. So if you believe in British imperialism circa the end of the 19th century, if you believe in Freud, and if you believe like Carl Jung that you and I have the same mind as an alien somewhere out there, 100 billion light years away, and there's no such thing as individual minds or creativity or uniqueness or distinct cultures or any of these kinds of things, then yes, absolutely, the hero's journey is the story for you. If you believe in science and biology, then no, it's basically up there with astrology. The deeper problem with Joseph Campbell's whole approach, though, is this idea that universal stories exist or would be a good thing. Story evolved in the human mind as a way of creating plots and plans in response to environmental challenges and opportunities. So in other words, anytime one of our ancestors encountered something they hadn't seen before, they had to come up with a new sequence of actions with how to deal with that. Maybe it was a good thing that they wanted to kind of get more of in their life, maybe it was something challenging that they wanted to figure out how to overcome. And in our own lives, it's the same. Our lives are constantly changing. The people who come into our lives, they're all different. We have to figure out new ways to interact with the people around us by listening carefully to them and what makes them distinct. We have to see the kinds of opportunities that are opening up in our global landscape. We have to respect other cultures by listening to them and seeing what's distinct about them. And this means that our mind has to constantly keep coming with new actions, new plots, new plans, new narratives. That's where story comes from. It's about adapting and changing to our environment, making ourselves new, branching and growing. And so like everything biological, there's not one ideal story. If you look out in a forest, is there one ideal tree? I mean, this whole idea of the universal is this fever dream, which we get from the Enlightenment and from Plato. And essentially, it's a kind of patriarchal imperialism, which is, I'm going to find the one truth and then impose it on everyone else. And it's just anti-life and anti-biological. So if you want my opinion, which you've already had in a screen rant, the hero's journey is itself total bunk, but any attempt to find universal stories is not healthy and not good. And we should be spending our time opening up our minds, embracing different kinds of stories, different ways of telling stories, and encouraging young people to be creative, not to be formulaic. I mean, does our society need more formula? Do we need less imagination? Do we look out in the world and say, oh, there's too much imagination in this world? There's too many good ideas, actually. We need to have more formula, and we need to have more people marching in lockstep. That's really what the world needs. So it's totally wrong biologically, and I think also wrong ethically.